Electricians typically receive training on asbestos awareness, identification, and safe work practices. They are taught to recognize common asbestos-containing materials, for example, insulation, floor tiles, and drywall, their potential risks, and the appropriate safety precautions. If an electrician encounters suspected asbestos-containing materials, they should firstly, immediately stop work and notify the supervisor or designated asbestos coordinator. Secondly, avoid disturbing the materials or creating dust. And thirdly, create a barrier to prevent dust from spreading. If asbestos is confirmed, the following protocol is typically implemented. Firstly, the area is isolated and secured to prevent access to unauthorized personnel. Secondly, a qualified contractor with asbestos abatement certification is brought on site to remove the asbestos safely and dispose of it properly. And thirdly, clearance testing is conducted to ensure the area is safe for reoccupancy. Electricians may take the following precautions when working in areas with potential asbestos. Firstly, wear appropriate personal protective equipment, also known as PPE, including respirators, gloves, and protective clothing. Secondly, use wet cleaning methods to minimize dust generation. And thirdly, avoid using power tools or creating vibrations that could disturb asbestos fibers. Electricians are required to adhere to regulations and industry best practices regarding asbestos management. They are expected to maintain their asbestos awareness training and follow established safety protocols to protect their health and prevent the spread of asbestos fibers. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral fiber that was widely used in construction and other industries for much of the 20th century. Its strength, heat resistance, and insulating properties made it a popular material. However, it was later discovered that exposure to asbestos fibers can cause serious health problems, including lung cancer, mesothelioma, and asbestosis. Because of these health risks, the use of asbestos has been significantly restricted or banned in many countries. However, it can still be found in older buildings and equipment, posing a risk to those who work on or around these materials. Asbestos-containing materials, or ACMs, can be found in a variety of building materials, including insulation, floor tiles, ceiling tiles, drywall, roofing shingles, and cement products. It was also used in some electrical components and equipment, such as wiring, insulation, and switchgear. When ACM are disturbed or damaged, they can release asbestos fibers into the air. These fibers can be inhaled, leading to the development of asbestos-related diseases. There is no safe level of asbestos exposure, and even low levels of exposure can increase the risk of developing these diseases. Due to the health risks associated with asbestos exposure, it is important for electricians and other construction workers to be aware of the potential presence of ACM in their work environment and to take appropriate precautions to protect themselves. Asbestos awareness training is an essential component of worker safety in industries where there is a risk of exposure to ACM. This training provides workers with the knowledge and skills they need to identify ACM, understand the risks of asbestos exposure, and follow safe work practices. The specific content of asbestos awareness training programs may vary depending on the industry and the level of risk, but most programs cover the following topics. Firstly, asbestos identification. Secondly, health effects of asbestos exposure. Thirdly, regulations and standards. Fourthly, safe work practices. And fifthly, personal protective equipment. Let's further define these topics. Asbestos identification training teaches workers how to recognize common ACM and their locations. This may include visual identification of materials, as well as the use of sampling and testing methods to confirm the presence of asbestos. Health effects of asbestos exposure training covers the various health problems that can result from exposure to asbestos fibers, including lung cancer, mesothelioma, and asbestosis. It also explains the latency period for these diseases, which can be several decades. Regulations and standards training provides an overview of the regulations and standards that govern asbestos management, including the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, asbestos standards. Safe work practices training teaches workers how to work safely around ACM, including the use of engineering controls such as ventilation and enclosure, and work practices such as wet methods and minimizing dust generation. Personal protective equipment training covers the proper selection, use, and maintenance of personal protective equipment, or PPE, such as respirators, gloves, and protective clothing. In addition to asbestos awareness training, electricians and other construction workers may also need to undergo specialized training for asbestos abatement or removal work. This training is more in-depth and provides workers with the skills and knowledge they need to safely remove or encapsulate ACM. The regulations governing asbestos abatement vary depending on the jurisdiction, but most require workers to be certified or licensed to perform asbestos abatement work. These regulations also specify the procedures for asbestos removal, including the use of containment systems, air monitoring, and waste disposal. When working in areas where ACM may be present, electricians and other construction workers should follow a number of safety precautions to minimize their risk of exposure. These precautions include, firstly, conducting a hazard assessment, secondly, using engineering controls, thirdly, using safe work practices, fourthly, wearing personal protective equipment, and fifthly, following proper hygiene practices. Let's further define these topics. Conducting a hazard assessment involves identifying potential sources of asbestos exposure and assessing the risk of exposure. This may include reviewing building plans, conducting visual inspections, and collecting samples for testing. Using engineering controls involves implementing measures to control the release of asbestos fibers into the air. This may include using ventilation systems, enclosing work areas, and using wet methods to minimize dust generation. Using safe work practices involves following procedures to minimize the disturbance of ACM and the release of asbestos fibers. This may include avoiding the use of power tools, using hand tools instead, and cleaning up any debris immediately. Wearing personal protective equipment involves using respirators, gloves, and protective clothing to prevent asbestos fibers from coming into contact with the skin or being inhaled. The type of PPE required will depend on the level of risk and the type of work being performed. Following proper hygiene practices involves washing hands and face frequently, showering after work, and avoiding eating, drinking, or smoking in work areas. It is also important to dispose of contaminated clothing and equipment properly. If ACM are discovered during electrical work, it is important to stop work immediately and notify the supervisor or designated asbestos coordinator. The area should be isolated to prevent the spread of asbestos fibers, and a qualified asbestos abatement contractor should be brought in to remove or encapsulate the ACM safely. The work area should not be reoccupied until clearance testing has been conducted to ensure that the air is free of asbestos fibers. Asbestos regulations and standards vary depending on the jurisdiction. In the United States, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has established asbestos standards for general industry, construction, and maritime sectors. These standards specify the permissible exposure limits, or PELs, for asbestos fibers in the air, as well as the requirements for asbestos monitoring, training, and abatement. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, also has regulations governing asbestos in schools and other buildings. These regulations require schools to inspect for asbestos and to develop and implement asbestos management plans. Many states and local governments also have their own asbestos regulations, which may be more stringent than the federal regulations. Electricians and other construction workers should be aware of the asbestos regulations in their jurisdiction and should comply with all applicable requirements. Failure to comply with asbestos regulations can result in fines, penalties, and even criminal charges. In addition to the legal requirements, there are also a number of best practices for asbestos management that electricians and other construction workers should follow. These best practices include, firstly, developing a written asbestos management plan, secondly, conducting regular asbestos inspections, thirdly, maintaining accurate records, fourthly, communicating with workers and building occupants, and fifthly, reviewing and updating the asbestos management plan regularly. Let's further define these topics. Developing a written asbestos management plan involves creating a comprehensive plan that outlines the procedures for identifying, assessing, and managing ACM in a building or facility. This plan should include information on the location of ACM, the risks of exposure, and the control measures that will be implemented. Conducting regular asbestos inspections involves periodically inspecting buildings and facilities for ACM and assessing their condition. This may include visual inspections, as well as the collection of samples for testing. Maintaining accurate records involves keeping detailed records of all asbestos-related activities, including inspections, sampling, abatement, and training. These records should be kept for a specified period of time and should be readily accessible. Communicating with workers and building occupants involves providing information on the presence of ACM, the risks of exposure, and the control measures that are in place. This communication should be ongoing and should be tailored to the specific needs of the audience. Reviewing and updating the asbestos management plan regularly involves periodically reviewing and updating the asbestos management plan to ensure that it remains current and effective. This review should take into account any changes in regulations, technology, or building conditions. Asbestos is a serious health hazard, and it is important for electricians and other construction workers to take appropriate precautions to protect themselves from exposure. By following the guidelines and best practices outlined in this discussion, workers can minimize their risk of asbestos-related diseases. Remember that proper training, adherence to regulations, and the implementation of safe work practices are essential for protecting workers and preventing the spread of asbestos fibers.